Much of what I will present is from research dating back to 2013, but only in the last month have I recognized something that must be researched, and I've begun to work on that, and that will be near the end of the presentation. In every age, the church needs fresh articulations of the truth that speak directly to that time. And this, by the way, I should introduce. This is a 12th century depiction, I think, of Mary Magdalene announcing the resurrection to the apostles, for which she was deemed apostle to the apostles, also Isa apostolos, equal to the apostles. And that goes back to the very early church, this recognition of her in this role. Fresh articulations of the truth are needed, especially with things that have been taken for granted, in some cases never even articulated before. They were just so much part of the faith or of the culture that they never were put into words. To state them explicitly now can give fresh vigor to the faith, and I think this is particularly true now with regard to the affirmations of women we find from the early church onwards. It's important to reclaim that heritage for the entire church, and also specifically for women. Deaconesses have been studied always, but especially since the 17th century, and especially since the 1970s. Excellent work was done by the International Theological Commission in 2003, by the commission appointed by Pope Francis in 2016, and by the new study commission on women and the diaconate, to which Pope Francis appointed me last year during Holy Week. And I've just come from the first meeting of that commission. And that's about all I can tell you. The whole thing is under pontifical secrecy. So when we are all done and present a report to the Pope, it will be up to him then what may be made public. But my own research, that freely I share with you. The context, theological and cultural, in which deaconesses arose, attests to the new Christian affirmation of women. And I'm going to do a very brief touch of history on this in the Old Testament and then the New. Very few people talk about the opening chapters of Genesis as revelation, but we do have the nature of God as one creator God revealed there. Centuries later, some Greek philosophers would reason from the orderliness of creation to one creator God. But God wanted that known first by his people through revelation, and he wanted to couple it with the revelation about human nature, made in the image of God. Male and female, arsen kai thelu, made in the image of God. Notice it is not man and woman. Some modern translations, the Spanish translation of the Bible says man and woman. It's more basic, male and female, encompassing the human person from conception onwards. One need not attain maturity to be the image of God. One is created in the image of God. And then with unprecedented emphasis, Jesus expanded on that. There are some Old Testament intimations of that, affirmations of that. When Ezra finds the scrolls and reads them to the people, men and women are all gathered together. You have specified male and female. The book of Daniel has woman and then boys and then man, risking their lives for the faith. So men and women, young and old. You have instances of that in the Old Testament. But what Jesus did was without precedent in any culture on the earth. He referred to men and women, male and female, more than anybody else in a balanced way. As I spoke of last time I was here, before he was born, he arranged that Elizabeth and the preborn John the Baptist would both acknowledge him. When he was presented in the temple, the elderly two, Simeon and Anna, proclaimed him, recognized him as the Lord, male and female. And then the Lord gave examples of receiving intercession from people and healing others on behalf of the intercession of male and female. He healed male and female. He healed male and female of unclean diseases. That's a nice balance there too. He raised male and female from the dead. In his prophecies, he gave male and female examples, and sometimes he gave an all-male example that clearly everyone was to take personally. Sometimes he gave an all-female example that everyone was to take personally. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that a man plants, or like leaven that a woman kneads into the dough. Many modern biblical translations don't see that, and they blow it. They say, like a mustard seed that a person plants, or like leaven that a woman kneads into the dough. Person, woman, no, it's male and female. We've got that balance in the original. Rejoicing over one repentant sinner is like the joy a man feels and leads his friends in when he finds the one lost sheep. And immediately afterward, Jesus says, it's like the joy the woman leads her neighbors in when she finds the one lost coin. This is one of the places, by the way, where there are types of Christ, and the Eastern tradition very early on began to preach that and still continues that today. And the balance of male and female types of Christ is from the balance in the Lord's parables. Therefore, the spiritual equality of the sexes was a defining factor of Christianity from the start. The disciples learned it from the Lord, and they followed through on it. First, they used it in their own teachings and writings. For instance, when Pentecost occurs, Peter speaks about the inspiration of the sons and daughters. He's drawing on the balance of the sexes from Joel, but he's using that. It comes to him naturally because of what the Lord has taught. St. James gives two examples of faith, Abraham and Rahab, which in the Greek are a word play. Their names are almost anagrams of each other. Through the ages, we see this continuing. I noticed that in the Mannheim for today, Michael and Theodora, martyrs of Chernigov, are celebrated together. And the Byzantine calendar has several pairs of male and female saints. More, I think, than is currently used in the Roman Rite. A dynamic instance in the first century of the balanced representation of the sexes is a brand new Christian exegesis, on which I'll speak later this week. Susanna as a type of Christ. That was even used within the Gospels themselves, not with her name, so many people don't recognize it, but in a very striking way. And second, the apostles saw to it that from the start, women, equally with men, received baptism, instruction, and communion. This is something we take for granted. Of course, I mean, that's the way it's always been. Yes, it's always been that way, because the Lord emphasized the spiritual equality of the sexes. If you look at the events that can be seen as preparing for the Eucharist, such as the Bread of Life sermon, hundreds of people hear it, but everyone leaves except the male disciples. At the Lord's Supper, it's the male disciples who are present. These men had to recognize the Eucharist is for everyone. Jesus never says that to them. They had to understand that and go forward with it, and they did. Contrast that to something else in the book of Acts. Whether Gentiles could become Christians without becoming Jews first was quite controversial. And it takes 100 verses, 6 chapters of the Acts of the Apostles to recount the events, the discussion, the visions, the convening of the First Church Council to resolve that. In contrast, look at that last passage there. St. Philip in the city in Samaria baptized Andres te kai gunaikes. Men and women. The te is in there simply for emphasis. Grammatically, it would be correct without that, but this means men and women. That is the only emphasis you find in the New Testament on women receiving baptism and communion. That's remarkable. 100 verses of the Acts of the Apostles to clarify how and under what conditions Jews can receive. And this reversal of Jewish pattern just taken for granted. Also, you find the introduction of the word suke, souls, to refer to all souls, instead of saying there were 500 men at this event, and then it's inferred that there were women and children as well. Luke and Peter start using suke, which is an inclusive noun. So way before diversity kicked in the new millennium, the disciples were seeking ways to emphasize the unity of women within the church. This is important. Women received baptism and communion easily, without dispute, without difficulty, without confusion. There's no evidence that anybody said, well, that's wrong. This is all the more notable as a contrast to the Jewish precedent. Consider the worship in the Second Temple and in the synagogues. The men's court in the Second Temple loomed large, literally, and was right next to the sanctuary. Outside the building was the women's court, and women were also allowed upstairs in the galleries, further away than the men. In contrast, from the first churches, it's clear this must have been the case in the earliest Eucharistic services, men and women came equally close to the sanctuary. Men and women came up directly to the sanctuary to receive the Eucharist. That is a radical Christian innovation, and it's something the pagans could not understand. They thought if men and women were together, they must be having orgies, and you find Roman mockery of Christians for that. But there was a pastoral problem because of the way that baptism was done in the early church. Baptism was of adults and in the nude. We have this represented prominently in the depictions of Christ at his baptism. That was the way everyone was baptized, sometimes with a loincloth. And then soon, anointings were added. And these were done by the hand directly. And it wasn't just a simple forehead. It was touching all the sites of the senses, a rather comprehensive blessing with oil. So again, the issue was, how do you respect and preserve the modesty of the woman being baptized and the priest who is baptizing her? Always it's important to notice what was not done. Nobody said, women can't be baptized, this would be improper. No one said, there should be a different way of baptizing women so that we don't have this problem. Maybe they'd be dressed, maybe they'd have fewer anointings. No, the church found a way to accomplish the sacrament, respecting the integrity of the sacrament and the need for women to have the sacrament and the need for the church to have women who had the sacrament. Baptistries were shallow pools. Sorry for my voice. And so another woman would assist the woman being baptized and give her most of the anointings. And the priest would lift up the flap and put his hand on her head and pronounce the baptismal Trinitarian formula. So in this way, everyone's modesty was respected, but the full sacrament was given. Various women did this. Family members. I don't think we know how soon godmothers come into the picture, but later on, godmothers can do this. Other women in the church, and later on, deaconesses. We even have a report that in one case, a catechumen did this. It was a time when, who was this, Philip? It was St. Thomas in his missionary work. There were two young women who wanted to be baptized in an area where there was no Christian community. So there was no Christian woman to assist. So St. Thomas directed one woman to give the anointings to the other. And then when she was baptized, she gave the anointings reciprocally. That's an extraordinary case, but it shows how there was no question of leaving out the anointings for this woman. And I think that's important to recognize, that the church had the respect for the sacraments and for the women deserving to receive the sacraments. Now, the women who helped, they could catechize members of their own family. We have lots of different records of this. Saint Macrina is famous for taking this role in her family, and she raised up 3 Cappadocian fathers, so we know women can do a good job of this. Assist at baptism. Home care for women. This was done, this is practical charity. And preparing a woman's body for burial. It's very interesting the way St. Gregory of Nyssa writes about his sister Macrina when she was being prepared for burial. A deaconess helped in this, but also a young widow who was a good friend of Macrina assisted, and it was the young widow who did most of the work. By the 3rd century, deaconesses had clear roles, and this is one of the famous known deaconesses, Olympia from Constantinople, who was a friend of St. John of Damascus. And I can tell I'm going to have to try and read more in St. John of Damascus to find out what he says about the range of things she did. She was both a religious, a nun, and also a deaconess. But in particular, deaconesses arose in certain Eastern communities which had an affinity with dualism. Copts, Paulinians, and others, some of whom outright rejected the incarnation. They had the sense that it would be demeaning to God to enter into his creation by taking on flesh. I find it fascinating that this difficulty with the humanity of Christ is often paired with a discomfort for men being around women. And I think there's much there that still needs to be studied. Why is that? You find that, I think, too, with the Protestant Reformation. You have a return to some segregation of women at that time. But these groups had a stronger segregation of the sexes. Think back to, I think it's Acts chapter 6, where they did not have such a strong segregation of the sexes, when it was called to the attention of the apostles that the Greek widows were being neglected. Notice that they didn't say, women, we better have a woman involved with the women. Women. No, they appointed men because there was no bar to the deacon serving women as well as men. That's an important point about how comfortable early Christians were with both sexes in community, if you will. Here, by the way, is an Ethiopian crucifixion showing the difficulty they had with the bodily aspect of our Lord. You see the crux gemata, a cross with gems on it, between the bodies of the 2 thieves on their crosses, and the body of Christ is not on the cross. Instead, the Lamb of God is depicted above to symbolize the Lamb of God. So that's close, but it isn't the full theology of the church. Now, in the groups that had such a strong segregation of the sexes, it was considered improper for a woman to speak directly to a deacon or priest. So deacons would be a liaison. A woman would speak to a deaconess, and either the deaconess would then on her own speak to the deacon or priest, or the deaconess would accompany the woman to speak to a deacon. So that's a kind of segregation that is very extreme. And this is the time when we did have the divided parts of the church, as still is true up in the Carpathian Mountains. I know at Revue. By mistake, I went in the men's door because I didn't know there was a woman's side and a man's side. A porter would keep order, would keep an eye on the men's side. And an older woman, a presbyteressa, an older woman, or a deaconess would keep an eye on the women's side. One of her roles might be to make sure that catechumens knew they were not to go up to receive the Eucharist, for instance. But another role specific to deaconesses, and I highlighted, is that she was authorized to take the Eucharist to housebound women on limited occasions. That, I think, is very important for what we're going to see in a bit regarding the rite for consecrating a deaconesses. I'm going to remind myself what I have next. Oh yes, diaconal abbesses. Of all the deaconesses, they had the greatest number of roles because they might be in a monastic setting remote from any male communities, and to make sure that the women in those monasteries, the Syriac monophysite monasteries, could receive the Eucharist without going for several weeks without it, and could chant the scriptures during the hours. The diaconal abbesses were consecrated to do just those things. They were allowed to go to the proscomedia table and retrieve some of the pre-consecrated communion and bring it to their sisters and to women and children up to the age of 4 who might be present. And the abbesses could chant the gospel as well as the epistle. No other women had any role in presenting the gospels because the other deaconesses were in non-religious communities. So all the men and women could be going to divine liturgy in common, and therefore there would be lectors, deacons, and priests who would present the scriptures. Now it's very important to take a close look at the rites involved in ordaining a deacon and consecrating a deaconess. In Syriac, you have quite distinct terms for that. Many similarities exist between them. They're parallel in structure all the way through. And many women and a few men who very much want women to be priests say there are no significant differences. But there are, and they were visible to everybody present, and they would have been experienced by the person becoming a deacon and the person becoming a deaconess. Even the way they were attired was different. The candidate for deacon would be in an alb, and the woman would be in ordinary attire. They entered the sanctuary after the reading of the gospel. It's likely, I think, although I've never seen anything saying this, that she entered on the Theotokos side and he on the Christos side. But I haven't seen anything that says exactly what door they entered. First would be the ordination of the deacon. He went before the bishop and they stood before the altar and right in front of the opened royal doors. And he knelt on one knee. That posture is significant. At a later date, if he was going to be ordained a priest, he would kneel on both knees. So his half kneel suggested the lesser degree of ordination he was receiving. The prelate placed his hand on the man's head and made the sign of the cross 3 times. He prayed over the deacon-elect. His invocation of Lord our God at once explained that the deacon-elect had been chosen by God to minister to your immaculate ministries, tois akrantois sui mysteriois, meaning, of course, the Eucharist. He prays that God will preserve this one to be ordained, literally to have hands laid upon by me, to the ministry of your service or diaconate. Bless him as Stephen the first martyr was, who had done the work of your service, diaconate. You have deemed him, the present candidate, worthy, kataxioson. Number him among your worthy, tois axiois su. The prayer closed with the doxology. Then one of the deacons began an ectony, during which the archbishop prayed a second prayer. This one cites God's teaching the apostles, as is recorded in the Gospels. Whoever wants to be first among you should be your servant, diakonos. You, Lord of the universe, fill also this servant of yours to enter into the ministry of a deacon, with all faith and love, all power and holiness, by the inspiration of your life-creating Spirit. For it is not by the laying on of our hands, but by your visitation with your abundant mercies, that grace is given to those worthy axiois of you. So may he become an alien to every sin, and on the fearful day of judgment appear before you blameless, and receive the trustworthy reward you have promised. For you are our God, the God of mercy and salvation. Then the bishop handed the deacon a rappidion, used during the liturgy, representing one of the liturgical roles the deacon was to have. Next, the archbishop placed an orarion over the shoulder of the deacon, the position in which the deacon wears the stole when praying the ectonies, lifting his hand up reverently, covering it with a stole, a symbol of reverence. It seems to me, I don't know this positively, but I think this is an essentially liturgical gesture, to have the hand covered when praying on behalf of the community. An aside, the only time I know of this with a woman is in some of the anastasis icons, where the Lord is raising Adam by the hand, and Eve is right there with her hands covered by her part of her garment, supplicating for all of her progeny through the centuries. That's the only time I know it where a woman is given what seems to me an essentially liturgical gesture. So again, the placement of the orarion points to a liturgical role the deacon has. So later in the liturgy, when the deacon is to distribute the communion, he must replace his orarion. Is that in fact what happens? That the deacon shifts it? Yeah. And at the very liturgy in which the deacon was ordained, after the consecration of the Eucharist, and after the bishop has given Eucharist to the deacon, the archbishop gives the deacon the chalice, and the deacon proceeds out to the congregation and distributes the Eucharist. So the very work that was mentioned in the first prayer over him, he immediately begins to fulfill right after his ordination. it must be a very moving experience, I would think. Now, the rite for the deaconess has several differences that would all be visible. While she wore her ordinary clothes, her mophorion was turned back on both sides for a purpose that becomes clear later on. She did not kneel, but she stood. Now, a number of people who want women to be ordained as priests say the only reason she didn't kneel is because it would have been thought improper for a woman to kneel down before a man in public. The people who say that don't really know the Eastern rites, because all the faithful at some times kneel and go into full proskynesis at different times of the year. And there was no differentiation between how men and women performed these liturgical actions, these actions of worship. Also, if you're going to change a sacrament to have a man's and a woman's version, the first one you change would have been baptism. And they didn't do that. So if they didn't think it was necessary to put a gown on a woman at baptism, I don't think they would have thought it would be necessary to prevent a woman from kneeling on one knee in front of the bishop. Now, difference in posture indicates that a serious blessing is occurring, but it is distinct from the ordinations, all of which involve some lowering to receive the weight of the sacrament. So this is the posture indicates a real difference here. Now, the first prayer has an extraordinary beginning. I think it's quite beautiful. O God, holy and omnipotent, who through the birth in the flesh of thine only begotten Son and our God, from a virgin, sanctified the female, and to not only men, but also to women, gave the grace, the visitation of the Holy Spirit. The Greek implies abiding presence. Notice that you have parthenu, and where's the other word? And philou, framing most of that first section. So you've got different forms of female framing that first section. It is classic Eastern and Western theology that by giving birth, the virgin's womb was sanctified. That's in some of the proper hymns. But this is taking it very seriously and expressing it here in this prayer. And it seems to me this is clearly referring to male and female called to theosis. And that's very important. That is the context in which these groups that had such strong sexual segregation needed deaconesses to make sure that women were not absolutely deprived of the Eucharist if they were housebound. They didn't get it all the time when they were housebound. In some places, only on Easter, but they got it sometimes. The prayer continues, therefore, Master, look down upon this your handmaid, call her into the work of your service, Diaconate, and send down on her the abundance of your Holy Spirit. So preserve her in orthodox faith and blameless conduct, that she may fulfill all aspects of her ministry, liturgion, in a way that is well-pleasing to you. For to you is due every glory and honor. Notice what's missing. We don't have any reference to the mysteries, to the Eucharist in this. We have reference to her roles of service. So that's a quite different focus. Then one of the deacons began an ectony, and the archbishop prayed the second prayer during this, and this prayer also is distinctive to the deaconess. He called upon God as Lord who does not reject women, gunaikas, desiring to serve your holy houses, tois agiois okiois su. The prayer for the deacon had recalled Stephen. This prayer recalls the service of your Phoebe. The work of ministry is cited with regard again to your holy churches, not the mysteries, your holy churches. God is asked to help her guard her behavior, especially in temperance and modesty. It really is sophrosynos, and that is global virtue. It includes modesty, but it's a form of wisdom, so that when she comes before the judgment seat of Christ, she may receive the worthy reward, axion miston, of good conduct, through the mercy and love of mankind, of your only begotten Son. Whereas 3 times the prayers of the deacon had used the word axios and cognates, of him, which is a word with clerical resonances. I mean, the acclamation, axios, 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 is for clerics. We don't have that for the deaconess. We have worthy reward, so it's not modifying her. It's a very interesting difference. After this prayer, the Archbishop did not give her a repidian, for she has no role in the liturgy. He placed an orarion around her neck. That's why the mephorion was turned back, because she does not chant the ectones during the liturgy. This is the position. She will wear the stole when she gives the Eucharist to a woman who is housebound. So this is visually pointing to her proper ministry proper to a deaconess. And then later, after the consecration has occurred, the Archbishop also communicates the deaconess as he did the deacon, and he hands the chalice to the deaconess, but she places it on the altar and departs from the sanctuary. Her role is over, and never again will she return to the sanctuary. This is quite a contrast to what the deacon does, going out immediately and communicating the people. Notice that if the church had wanted the deaconess to communicate only women, but whenever there was opportunity, she could simply have gone to the Theotokos side and communicated the women. That would ensure that only women received from the woman. The fact that that never happened, we have no evidence that anything like that ever happened, indicates that her role was just to take it to housebound women. It's the only time I know of in any Eastern church where there is something at all analogous to the modern role in the Roman Church, an extraordinary minister of the Eucharist, a lay person who can take the Eucharist to somebody housebound. But then they take it to both sexes. In the time of deaconesses in the Eastern churches, it was only to women that the deaconess did this. And we have explanation by an archbishop. Theodore Balsamon, I think, is one of the people who refers to this, saying, it would have been scandalous for people to see a deacon or priest entering the home of a woman. Therefore, it was necessary to have a woman do this. Notice again, the church did not say, well, people would think it was scandalous if one of the clerics took it to her, so she'll have to do without. No, the church found a way to make sure the woman could still get the Eucharist, even though she wasn't present at the Divine Liturgy. Now, the numerous differences, you can tell, would be clearly visible. People would not have heard the differences in the prayers, but everything else would be highly visible to the whole congregation. The only time any woman entered the sanctuary during Divine Liturgy was if she were to be consecrated a deaconess. And then she's not only there, she's standing right in the place of consecration by the altar, before the royal doors, beside the archbishop or bishop. In 1982, Aimé Georges Martimort, who's got a fantastic book looking at such a wealth of evidence about deaconesses, he noted that he could not find a theological reason for this. Why would this occur in the sanctuary? And that's one of the things I think I saw in 2013 and have that in my first article. And I think God wanted a woman to see this. Whereas the lower offices, lector, cantor, porter, and those were blessed for their ministries, usually in the sacristy, because they had no liturgical role. The deacon and priest were ordained in the sanctuary. And the deaconess is anomalous. Like the lower offices, she has no role in the Eucharistic liturgy. But, like the priest and deacon, she does have one role with the Eucharist. She's authorized to convey it to housebound women. And the church, I think, out of respect for the Eucharist itself and for women, the women who are going to be ministered to by the deaconess, as well as the deaconess herself, to whom this wondrous role has been entrusted, the church's respect in those regards led her to have the consecration of the deaconess within the sanctuary. I think that accounts for the presence there in the sanctuary, and it happened in the context of divine liturgy. The blessings for the lower offices did not. By the way, scholars agree there is, quote, almost no textual correspondence between these prayers. Whereas the Immaculate Mysteries of the Eucharist are focal in the first prayer over the deacon, they're never mentioned in the deaconess. Whereas the laying on of hands is twice referred to in the prayers over the deacon. Again, it's never mentioned for the deaconess, as the word axios is 3 times in the prayers for the deacon, referring to him. It is only once in the prayer for the deaconess, the second one, referring to her reward at the end of life. So these are very clear distinctions. By the way, that first prayer, that invocation with the word thelu, notice how that harkens back to Genesis, the creation of male and female in the image of God. And here this invocation is saying, the female is sanctified by the incarnation. Given that deaconesses were commissioned for a specific ministry to women exclusively, it's reasonable to see in that invocation affirmation of the women to be served, as well as the deaconess herself. Now, some new research, begun only a month ago, clarifies the context in which the need for deaconesses arose. The theology of these churches, except when some of them wrote about the incarnation, was sound. That prayer, that invocation, that is beautifully done theologically. But these churches, with dualism in them, had practices that were at odds with their own theology. And this seems not to have been noticed. The earliest writings I find from Orthodox about this are 20th century, and so there's still a separation. But the women in the 20th century who call attention to this distinguish the true theology from the flawed anthropology. They've got that very clear in their minds, and they're absolutely right. The dualism led them to make the theological mistake of retaining the Levitical laws of ritual impurity for women. That's Leviticus 12 and 15. I'm not sure, I think I do have a slide on this. Yes. This is some of the brand new work. I haven't fully fleshed this out. Jesus suspended those. He does not state that. This is analogous to the way that he taught the spiritual equality of the sexes. He didn't state it, he demonstrated it over and over again. Remember that the account of the woman with the flux of blood is in the same scriptures with the healing of the daughter of Jairus. And that's very interesting because the daughter of Jairus has just reached the age where she might begin menses. And I think that's one of the implications about this. The Levitical laws of impurity that deal with a woman who has a lengthy issue of blood, which is usually, I think, referring to a woman who has an abnormal menses. So the woman in the scriptures, it's a worse problem. That's a disease she has. It speaks, as many of the ritual laws of impurity do, about how touching is not allowed, and people who touch her themselves become ritually impure. Psao, that same verb is repeated up to 5 times in the synoptic accounts of the woman with the flux of blood. The woman intends to touch, she does touch. The Lord notices he has been touched. He asks about it, and his disciples say, how can he tell he's been touched? An emphasis on that very verb of touching. Now, compare this to a leper whom he heals later on, not very far off in time from the healing of this woman. Jesus, to the woman, calls her daughter and declares that her faith has healed her of her disease. Again, a noun that harkens back to the language of ritual impurity. He does not tell her to follow the law of ritual impurity that is sequent upon having had a flux of blood. But he does tell the leper who has been healed to show himself to the priest. So he has not fully suspended that. He has just dropped it for the woman. Then when he goes to the home of Jairus and the daughter has just died, well, there's another Levitical law that touching a corpse makes one unclean. Jesus takes her by the hand. In the other resuscitation miracles, no. He couldn't touch Lazarus, he's in the tomb. And the young man, the son of the widow of Nain, is already on the bier. Jesus touches the bier, which is proximate. I don't know if the law of ritual impurity would apply to that. I don't know. But he does touch the young woman while she is a corpse and returns her to life. And he himself does not act as if he's been made ritually impure. So I think this takes away, this suspends for Christians the laws of ritual impurity. Now, at the same time, it's fair to think about these laws with a twofold aspect. I'm going on a little long, is that okay?
It's okay.
They were given to a Bronze Age people, and the Lord wants his people to be healthy. And they did not have the science. Science is based on observation. The only observation they had was the senses directly and experience. They thought leprosy was highly contagious, so they separated it. It's minimally contagious, but they didn't know that. Blood, when it leaves the body, is liable to infection. And in a time when there is not running water, when there are no synthetic materials, but only plant and animal materials for coping with issue from the body, it's a lot more problematic. a lot more difficult to cope with. And there was reason for being careful about it in a way that does not apply for large portions of the world today, but certainly not all of it even now. Yet, and here again I have to do more work on this, some of the laws of ritual impurity for women include a reference to sin after childbirth, and I think after a long issue of blood, with no explanation of what the sin is. And I think that's an error, I think, theologically, that the people didn't fully understand why they were being careful, I think. Usually when that kind of care would involve sin, and that carried over somehow. But it's worth saying, and I'm going to say it, birth, of course, is not a sin. Being female is not a sin. After giving birth, a woman was supposed to be sequestered twice as long if she'd had a daughter, and then give a sin offering if it was a daughter. So there's something that's not spiritual equality right there. The Old Testament gets high marks, but not there. I don't mean to be flippant, but... Now, St. John Chrysostom in the early church recognized the problem of some Eastern groups that continued those laws of impurity, and he said they're superstitious. And recently, the Orthodox Church of America rejected the practices of sustaining those ritual laws as, quote, dogmatically indefensible. Currently, in Orthodox churches and in some, at least, Eastern Catholic churches, there is great unevenness into how these laws are applied, whether they're just passed over and they're in the prayer books but they're not used, or whether they're actively used, or if they're used stringently or in an intermediate way. Here are the comments from 2008 from Vasa Lauren, a Russian Orthodox nun who did a Ph.D. with Father Robert Taft, summa cum laude, and works essentially on liturgies, the history of the liturgy, but she has one article on ritual impurity. Quote, when I entered a convent, I've got it on a slide, of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, I was introduced to restrictions imposed on a nun when she has her period. Although she was allowed to go to church and pray, she was not to go to communion. She could not kiss the icons or touch the antidoron. She could not help bake prosperas or handle them, nor could she help clean the church. She could not even light the lampada, or icon lamp, that hung before the icons in her own cell. I do not remember that anyone attempted either to question or justify these strictures. We simply presumed that menstruation was a form of impurity, and we had to stay away from things holy so as not to somehow defile them. She is most articulate about the relationship between theology and anthropology, but there are other Orthodox groups, including large women participating, a large amount of women participating in them, that speak of the practices without referring to the theology as clearly as Lauren does. In Istanbul in 1997, a convention on discerning the times asked the hierarchy to reevaluate certain practices that included, the 40-day rule for childbirth, the prayers for miscarriages, abortions, and postpartum mothers, and expectations pertaining to the reception of communion. And I see these as a cultural practice of continuing a mistaken use and expansion of the ritual laws of impurity, which came from a link with dualism. And given this, the institution of deaconesses, remember, everything they did was service to women because women were restricted and separated, couldn't speak to a cleric. So the deaconess had to be present or convey the message for her. Deaconesses were a blessed way the church had of alleviating some of the the improper restriction of women based in dualism. But the institution of deaconesses was an accommodation to dualism. No one who writes today about restoring the order of deaconesses acknowledges the historical information I've presented here. They act as if, oh, deaconesses were in the sanctuary all the time. They did everything deacons did. And that is simply not true, and there's no documentation that suggests that. That's what I say is due to the hermeneutics of desire. They want so much for women to be ordained now. They want women of the past to have been deacons with the full clerical role of deacons. But as you've seen, that was never the case. The church from its earliest days ensured that her daughters as well as her sons equally receive instruction, baptism, and the Eucharist. We know that as early as the Acts of the Apostles. Because every human person is created in the image of God, male and female, that's true of each of us. Now, I want to mention something else said by the women in Istanbul. They asked for those practices to be reconsidered, with the implication is, please free us of those. But they also asked for more access to theological education for women, and they wanted to be allowed to serve in the eparchies. They wanted to be engaged, some of them in evangelical work, in counseling the laity, in assisting pastors in various ways. In Russia, starting in the 19th century, you had abbesses and patriarchs saying, we don't need deaconesses to baptize, to help with baptism. That's no longer problematic. But let's take the name deaconess and put it on a different ministry. I think that's a mistake, because I think as soon as you do that, the women who say women should be ordained a priest are going to say, see, deaconesses were always female deacons, and therefore, if we call them deaconess now, they're going to mistake that. And the faithful will be misled. I am the minority voice. Most of the voices speaking about deaconesses are misrepresenting them. But the ministries that were recommended by the Russian Orthodox included evangelization, and Patriarch Nicetas, I think it was, said, we want them to evangelize and have specialties to Jews, to Muslims, to pagans. Let's have a whole monastery of deaconess missionaries doing this. And assigning different lay ministry roles to deaconesses is what they all had in mind. There is an increasing thing in the Roman Rite, and I think here as well, you have women on the faculty of theology, which would not have happened among the Monophysites. And you have in different places women who are chancellors of universities or administrators in various ways, women who have administrative roles within parishes and eparchies and larger structures than that. And that is something Vatican II called for the sort of the flourishing of. It contrasted modernity, which I see as post-Protestant Reformation. That really kind of restricted some of women's roles. Ironically, that's not what people say. To the fruitfulness for the laity, male and female, in the early church. So, seen properly, the historical institution of deaconess stands as a powerful instance of the Church's affirmation of women and her determination to make sure that women had access to the Eucharist. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine.